listening to Journey Back, the podcast about past life regressions, ghosts, and much more with your host, Cliff Aguirre.
Today on this episode of Journey Back, I have a special guest, Will Murray. And will be talking about his abilities at ghost clearing from houses that have ghost activity. So I'd like to welcome Will Murray to the show. So Will, tell the listeners information about you. Who are you?
Well, I'm a longtime professional writer, but part-time professional psychic and medium. I started in the psychic business in 1997 and trained in mediumship and remote viewing from 2000 till probably about 2003 or 5. So I've been a professional medium and a remote viewer since probably 2003. I'm semi-retired now, but I still do, the work when people reach out to me.
How did you get into house clearing, and what exactly is it?
Well, you call it house clearing, and I'm familiar with the term, but I never thought about what I do as house clearing. My view of house clearing is when someone goes into a disturbed or paranormally afflicted home with sage and other things, and they do a ritual and they clear the house of any ghosts or entities. What I do is I do entity ghost removals, but remotely. I don't go to the property. I do it as a remote viewing / mediumship exercise, so it's kind of an out-of-body thing. And but it has the same effect, if not a better effect. But I came upon it, accidentally. And I'll tell you the story, so it's a good way to set up what it is I do. About 10 years ago, it was 2012, a woman reached out to me on Facebook who had heard through the grapevine I did psychic readings. And she lived in this apartment with her husband and her teenage daughter. And the teenage daughter had been complaining about a shadowy figure in her room, and they dismissed it, as people often do. One morning, the woman woke up in bed, and there was what she described as a somewhat childlike figure standing next to the bed with arms outstretched, sort of trying to pull her in some way. And she thought, because she wasn't completely awake, it was her teenage daughter, but it was taller than her teenage daughter, and it wasn't this distinct figure. And she reflexively responded to the outstretched arms by, stretching out her arms. There was probably some confusion in her mind as to whether this was her daughter or not. And then she realized this wasn't her daughter, and she started screaming for her husband to wake up. And he woke up, and the thing was gone. And there were other incidents where whether she was going to bed or waking up, this thing would appear, and she'd feel a pull or a tug. And she started taking her daughter's complaints seriously, but the husband didn't. And then a little bit later, he saw the thing, the creature, the whatever it was, the entity. We'll call it the entity. So she reached out to me and said, can you help me with this? And I said, well, I can read it. And so we did a phone reading. She was in California, as I recall. And she front-loaded her story a little too much for my comfort. Front-loading is a remote viewing term where someone tells you too much about the target before you remote view the target. And she said that her apartment was built on a foundation of a Victorian house that had burned out maybe 60 years previously, and that someone had died in the fire. And she thought, well, could that be the person? So I read it. I did it as a tarot card reading, if I'm not mistaken. And I saw fire, and, I had a sense of things that was consistent with what her theory was. But because she told that stuff to me and up front, I was less confident in my reading than I would have been otherwise. And for no reason that I could think of, I said, well, let me see if I could do something about this. I'd been doing some remote healing at the time. So I was comfortable with the idea of, reaching out remotely and affecting things or moving energy in a positive way. She may have given me her address, I don't recall, because I usually work off addresses when I do this. What I do is I lie down and go into a meditative state, and I protect myself with white light, and I mentally focus on the area or the place where there's an issue. And I found myself in a shadowy space, and there was a figure that I perceived, and I couldn't make it out distinctly. This is often the case. Sometimes they're just outlines. And I tried to connect with it, and I didn't get anything. I got a sort of a sense of anger or an animal-like sense or a strongly emotional sense. And I'm thinking, what do I do about it? Now that I'm here, what do I do about this? Because I hadn't thought it through. I hadn't thought about doing anything more than remote viewing the environment and seeing what I could see. And I had been filling the place with white light, because that's normally a thing you do when you try to do healings or clearings or stuff like that. And it popped into my head, for no reason I could think of, to open up a portal. Now, the idea of a portal between this world and the next is something I probably had heard of somewhere, but I tended to think of them as, things that go on in fantasy novels as opposed to, the real world, or the world of the real world of psychic work. So I said, well, all right, I'm gonna pray or activate a portal or whatever it is I did. It's fuzzy in my memory now, 10 years later. But a portal opened up, and I asked that someone come and take this person out and cross them over. And that seemed to happen. I closed the portal, and I returned to my own physical body. And I emailed the woman and said, okay, if what I just experienced has any validity, it's gone. And so I checked in a week later, and no sign of it. A month later, no sign of it. 6 months later, no sign of it. A year later, no sign of it. And I've never heard since that it's been back. And I said to myself, well, I guess it took months and months before I was willing to accept that I had accomplished something. But at the end of that point, I said, well, I guess I did it. I said, that's interesting. And I didn't think of it as anything more than an unusual experience that you sometimes have in this life, where someone asks you to do something unusual, you do it, and then you just move on to the more commonplace psychic work. It's a long way of telling the story, but that's the whole story.
Well, I know that I asked you to help me with some house clearing of my own. And
several times, but you should tell the first time, because that was really unusual.
I had a woman climb into bed with me at night. But the thing of it is that this woman was a ghost and was actually, she, in her own words, dead. But every so often, I would hear her footsteps on the kitchen floor, which would lead to the living room and then into my bedroom. And then she would hit the bed and then crawl in next to me and put her arm around me. And this happened 4 times. And finally, the last time I was able to kind of turn around and look at her. And I asked her, well, why are you doing this? She says, oh, I just like to, journey around, go places. I said, are you alive? Are you dead? She says, oh, no, I'm dead. And I called Will. And I said, Will, do you think you could help me with her? And that's how Will got involved.
Now, I'll tell you what I remember of that, and bizarrely, almost nothing. I remember getting the call and you telling me this and being very intrigued, because it's not the commonplace experience, even for a professional medium like you or me. But obviously, it was a situation that needed an intervention, So I remember taking the call, hearing the things you just described, and saying, I'll take care of it if I can. Because this was only my second time, and it was probably months, if not a year or so, after my first experience. And I wasn't thinking I was going to be doing this again, because my impression was you don't have a lot of these problems out there. My impression has changed since then. But, back then I figured, well, there's not a lot of call for this kind of work, at least the way I do it. So, I know I did it. I know I called you to say, I think I got rid of her or maybe I was more competent than that. And you reported that from the point at which I started, and this is a refrain I hear often because I tend to work just around the midnight hour because that's when I usually go to bed, and I need to do this work when I'm not interrupted so the cat doesn't jump on my chest when I'm reclining, or the phone doesn't ring, or this happens or that happens. So, I do it at night. I know I told you that I had an encounter. I know you said that from that point, literally that night, she did not appear again.
And she has never appeared again.
And she has never appeared again.
And that must have been 6 years ago?
Something like that. It may have been a little longer. It was sometime after the first one, but not close to it. And what's very strange about this is even though the first experience I often reflected on as an unusual experience and one of the more interesting ones I've ever had, your experience, which is just as interesting, just dropped out of my consciousness. I forgot all about it until maybe a year later you reminded me of it. So, yeah, I did do that. And when I thought about it, I said, okay, what did I do? And I couldn't remember. And I still can't. I have no idea what the encounter was like.
I remember.
No memory of it all. What do you remember I said to you? Do you?
No, I don't remember. I just remember her getting into my bed. Anyway, I'll tell the listeners, I really don't know how Will does this, but he does it. I've had him work with my house a few times and successful each time. And the more I talk about Will to people, the more I find people who are going, I need to get a hold of him. I have this ghost in my house. I have this in my house. And suddenly Will's getting very popular.
It's interesting because part of me is thinking it's because of the pandemic, people are home more. They're up later because they don't get up to work as early, at least some of them. And they may be just more aware of an issue that they kind of dismissed. Like I know at one point you had a situation where a TV remote kept moving around. And I think if your TV remote was in a certain place and you in the morning and you went off to work and it was somewhere else at night, you'd say, well, I'm probably misremembering that. Whereas if it was in a certain place when you went to make, a midnight snack, when you came back, it was in a completely different place. You said, I didn't move that. Nobody moved that.
Actually, the TV turned on.
That's right. That's
quite a few times.
Thing. Yeah, electrical things happen, in some of these instances. I'm becoming aware that ghost entities, even poltergeists, which I'd been a little skeptical of before I started doing this, are much more common in people's houses than I think. And it's not always older houses, although, what constitutes an old house is now is different than when it used to be. A 1950s house is an old house. The house I was living in as a teenager and adult, which was a very old house, an 1880s house, the first day we moved in, we knew there was something weird because it was a hot, windless August day, windows open, but no breeze. We're standing in the living room, and a door on one side, which was open, starts to move more openly and stops after a few inches, and nobody was near it. And then a second later, another door on another right-hand wall opened in the opposite direction the same way, as if someone was passing through the room and just moving the doors slightly to accommodate their passing. And we're looking at this saying, what the heck? We found out later the house had a reputation of being haunted and had been actually not lived in for 3 years before my parents bought it. And in the years since, I had strange things happen, none of them negative, but they were interesting. I'd often find something out of place that was a piece of paper or a magazine or something that was significant or was going to be significant to something I was going to work on as a writer. And this especially happened after I'd moved out, but the house was still being maintained, and I'd go over to look for files or move my stuff around or gather something or drop something off. And I'd find something, what's this doing here? This newspaper clipping, I forgot I had it. this fits perfectly with something I'm working at. It happened easily 12 times and maybe 20-something times. So, I was familiar with the issues of strange things happening in houses that could not be easily explained. And so I'm comfortable with doing this work. I'm just kind of surprised how much of it. And I'm not sure what to make of poltergeist phenomena, because I can understand someone who lived in a house lingering there or revisiting there. But I don't know what the hell poltergeists are. They're a very different type of thing, and I've had to deal with them a few times, and they fight back.
Tell the listeners what the difference is between a poltergeist and a ghost.
Well, a ghost seems to be either a person who once inhabited a house, or in some cases a wandering spirit. Your woman who crawled into bed, there's been a few of those I've encountered. They are just wanderers, people who didn't fully transition. They're wandering the earth. They don't interact with people that much, but they like to go from place to place and sometimes interact, but sometimes just simply being seen. Poltergeist, I don't know what they are. The one time I had a glimpse of one, it looked kind of very short, brutish, bearded male face, kind of like what they used to call a gnome or a troll or a kobold. There's many names to them. I don't know what they are. But, these guys don't want to go. Ghosts are often cooperative, or even if they're reluctant, they will listen to reason. And even if they don't listen to reason, it's a simple matter of wrapping them in white light and removing them either by, slight coercion or sometimes just sudden, unexpected relocation. Poltergeists, they just cause trouble. They move things around, they throw things around, I don't know where they come from. I don't know what they're doing there. They're just as immaterial as ghosts. People almost never see them. They see ghosts. I don't think they see poltergeists. I think they just know that something is throwing, Coke cans around, and it's not visible. And so poltergeist, I think, is a German term for noisy ghost, and we tend to call them mischief makers because they're only there to cause minor trouble. And there's another class of entities I've encountered once or twice, which I would call creatures. And the few times I've seen something like them, they tend to be kind of floaty, butterfly, manta ray, stingray kinds of things that are not negative. They just wander in from some other reality, and if you can locate them and you can open up a portal, you can sort of coax them back over to their reality, and that's the end of it. There may be other things that I haven't encountered yet. I must say that I've done this now more than 20 times, and probably less than 25. I've lost count. And so I've run the gamut of ghosts, apparitions, poltergeist creatures. I did an attachment once. I'll tell you the story briefly. Someone I know complained to me that they would wake up at night in some kind of nightmare and not be able to breathe. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like a normal kind of nightmare. So I said, let me look at it. And I was thinking maybe she's got an entity in her house. Well, what I discovered is she had an attachment, something that I've heard of but had no experience of. An attachment is, I guess you would call it a kind of a psychic vampire or an energy parasite or something. Like some of these poltergeists, just a negative entity. And I discovered this thing, and it was essentially feeding off her fear when she would sleep. It would sort of create nightmares or prompt nightmares or do something. And this thing was really vicious. When I confronted it, it was about the size of a large child. It was man-like. It was nasty, threatening, whatever. And I tried to wrap it in white light and bring it over, and it got away from me once. I had it by the ankles at one point, and then it grabbed me by the ankles, and this thing just did not want to go. And this was the worst struggle I ever had with anything like that. The poltergeists are like that. They fight really hard. And I got it over, and that was it. That was the end of that. And I've been a little afraid to tell the woman what I perceive, because you don't want people being scared, but nevertheless.
Do you think attachments are created by people's negative emotions?
I try to be careful about assuming things. So since I only dealt with one, I can't tell you. In this case, I had the impression that the attachment had attached itself during a negative period in this person's life when they were living less than ideal lifestyle. And it got in through what I gathered to be a crack or a break or a tear in their aura or their soul or whatever. I don't have a complete understanding. But they were vulnerable to intrusion. And if I had done more than one, I might be able to give you a fuller answer. But I don't know. I don't like the fact that they're attachments. I don't understand why these things exist. I don't understand why poltergeists might exist. But we have to look at reality unflinchingly if we're going to deal with it. And, if these things are out there, then it's a question of, okay, how do we get rid of them?
So you do all this stuff from your bed?
Or a couch. But basically what I like to do, as I mentioned, is say, I usually go to bed at midnight. That's my normal bedtime. It might be a little later. So it's not the witching hour or anything. It's just, that's my bedtime. So I turn off all the lights. I meditate. I take my time. In remote viewing, they taught you to armor up, to imagine yourself encased in armor as a protection. In most other spiritual disciplines like mediumship, they tell you to surround yourself by white light. So I do both. I give myself time to get into the right space, and when I'm ready, usually I'll have the address of the afflicted house. I like to ask for the primary color of the house. And if there's an afflicted room or bedroom or section of the house, that too, so I can go into the right area. I go in and I basically poke around until I encounter something. And then I confront it. Sometimes the confrontation is, who are you? What are you doing here? Do you know why you're doing here? Do you know you're dead? And sometimes the confrontation is basically fighting back. I've been jumped a few times. I make it sound funny, but I seem to be safe when I do this because it's a non-physical thing that I do. But I've been jumped more than once before I can even find anything. It's like they see me and they jump me, and I guess because they don't expect to be challenged. I will tell you a story that because I told you the story before, that illustrates that. A woman I know who worked in a bookstore, who was a little bit intuitive herself, she asked me one day what I'd been doing. I said, I've been getting rid of ghosts. To my surprise, she said, well, we have one here. I said, really? She said, yeah, at night something would knock things over, move things around. And the store owner across the street complained of the same stuff. Something would disturb his shelves after he closed up at night. So they figured there's a ghost going back and forth across the street from store to store and just, wreaking havoc, minor havoc. And she said that one employee spent the night there for some reason. And by the next morning, he was completely terrified. So much stuff was going on. So I said, well, see if I can take care of this. So that night at midnight, I went into my usual routine and I mentally relocated myself to the store. And almost immediately, I was jumped by something that was white, tall, had its arms extended up, and, kind of made me think of, a pterodactyl or something, or an old-fashioned kind of ghost that wears a sheet. I think it was just trying to scare me, but it jumped me. We got into a big fight. I subdued it, and I got it over. I crossed it over. The long way. I didn't open a portal. I just take them over to, I guess I'll call it a wormhole or a whatever. I guess that's a portal too. To what's called the reception area. In some of my training, we used to go to a spiritual place where we could, acquire knowledge and interact with guides and stuff. And there's an area on the other side called the reception area. It's just a grassy area. There's some buildings, a library, things like that. And you take them over there and just hand them off to whoever was there to receive them, and they would be managed, processed, whatever. I don't know what goes on, but I assume they're well taken care of. And so I got this thing over, and after a fight, and I didn't understand why I had such a battle. But I asked you to look at it without telling you what had happened. And you told me the first thing you saw was you got jumped. You were attacked. I said, that's right. Why was I attacked? Do you want to tell the rest of that story from your perspective?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't remember what I said.
Well, okay. What you said was, it really freaked me out, but it was plausible. You said that the ghost was present when I was talking to that girl. And he overheard our conversation and overheard me saying I was going to be coming for him. And in his arrogance, those are your words, he said, he can't do anything to me. You know, so when I showed up that same night, he was so freaked out, he jumped me. And you thought he was someone who'd lived in the neighborhood a long time ago, died young, relatively young, and just didn't like the changes and just couldn't move on.
For our listeners, let's tell them that we live in the New England area, so a lot of the buildings are from the 1700s.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot anymore, but I would say a lot are still from the 1900s.
Oh, that's true, too.
Yeah. But I think, because I live in an area that had a lot of older houses, they've been torn down over the last few generations to make way for
progress.
Progress. But yeah, there used to be a lot of buildings like that. There were less. But what's interesting is the building can be torn down, but the ghost might remain in the new building, as illustrated by the woman whose apartment house was built on a Victorian foundation.
So how old do you think the bookstore building was?
That's a relatively new building. That can't be more than 30 years old, 40 at the most.
Oh. So it must have had to do with the land, I guess.
Must have had to do with the land, yeah.
Or location.
And I suspect that when buildings are torn down, that's why we might have wandering spirits who, you know, when their original home was gone, they just wander the earth looking for whatever interests them.
Well, you remember the house that I lived on in Warren Ave and Milton. That was the most haunted house I'd ever lived in. But that did not start until the landlord started talking about selling the house.
Uh-huh.
And that's when all the activity took place. I'm doing another podcast just on that because it was so scary. But I remember at the very last day that we were there, you brought some kind of a board in. It wasn't a Ouija board, but it was something else.
Board, yeah.
And we were asking questions, and the very last question you asked was, what do you want us to do? And it wrote out, get out. So we all packed up and ran out, never to come back again.
Yeah.
I never want to live in a house like that ever again. Yeah. Now, you do a lot of these clearings all over the United States.
That's a great part of it. Apparently, there's a new vogue of people doing house clearings by visiting and charging a lot of money for real estate companies or people selling haunted houses and wanting to be cleared, because some states have laws about if you can't knowingly sell a haunted house without revealing it.
Well, when I buy a house, I'm definitely calling you.
So what states? California at least twice. Mm-hmm. There was one in the upper West Coast that I think you brought to my attention.
That was Washington.
Washington. I couldn't remember it was Washington or Oregon. I've done two in New Orleans that were interesting. I've done several here in Massachusetts and a couple of other places in the Midwest. I'm trying to remember where you steered a lot of them to me because you hear about them through your client base. So I've done them all over, but I haven't done any outside of the United States. I'd love to do some in England. Just need addresses and stuff. And I've done some in the South. Well, New Orleans is the South. But I've done more than 20. And there hasn't been an instance where the thing has come back, although there have been a couple instances where quite a while later there's been new activity. And I have to go in and clear that out. So once you clear a house, it's usually cleared. But if there's a situation attached to the house or attached to a person in the house that might attract these things, you can have a recurrence. Well, it's usually a new thing as near as I can tell.
Well, after you got rid of the woman, we've had other things happen since that has nothing to do with her. We've heard a man walking through our living room and different other things happening where things were being moved, but they're kind of noisy. So,
Yeah, noisy ghosts,
yeah. So you've come and cleared them out too. So you kind of have a rotating account with us,
Yeah. And I remember I did your mother's house in California.
Right.
I forgot about that.
Oh, yes.
And tell that story. Tell the story what was going on.
So when I would be at my mother's house, I would sleep out in the living room on a pull-out bed. That was because I had other family members living there that, wanted the beds, which was fine. But I'd be laying there and I'd hear my mother coming down the hallway. So, it was middle of the night, so I'd get up and look around to say something to her, and there was nobody in the hallway whatsoever. And then the very back bedroom, my kids got to the point where they would not sleep in that bedroom whatsoever. They'd sleep on the floor next to me rather than sleep in that bedroom because there was always something that was shaking the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they laid still, it would still be shaking the bed. And the very last incident of that happening, my daughter got up, took her 2-year-old son, and said, "We're going to a motel." And so they left, they went to a motel, and I took over the bedroom. But when I took over the bedroom, I started yelling at that ghost saying, "How dare you get rid of my daughter like that?" and everything. I was really mad. But none of my kids would sleep in that room, and there was something always going on. My mother, who was probably maybe 101 at the point or whatever, said, "I think my house might be haunted."
Yeah. Now, you're telling the story a little differently than I remember it. And let me tell you how I remember it. The shaking, I think what I remember was it was a dresser that was shaking or a dress drawer that was rattling. I don't remember the bed part, but they made me connect.
It was the bed.
That's a common thing I hear about. Mm-hmm. I did one recently, as you know, where there was a bed. Anyways, the way I remember it is you talked about the shaking bed. I said, let me do something here. And I did something, and it stopped completely for years.
Mm-hmm.
And you slept in that bed without a problem. But then on the occasion when your daughter slept in the bed, it started up again, and I went in and I took care of it again. And I remember you telling me your daughter had to sleep in a motel. She just couldn't take it. That's how bad it was. And that house, I don't have to tell you, but for the audience, that house burnt down in the Paradise, California fire. Right. So definitely the activity has stopped. What I never understood was if I took care of it the first time, even though it was years later, it started up again, but with a different person. I've never understood that as to if I took care of it, why did it start up? If I didn't take care of it, why didn't it start up when you slept in the bed?
It had something to do with my kids because my middle daughter and my older daughter slept in the same bed together. And my older daughter told me that while my middle daughter was sound asleep, my older daughter could see her being pushed around in the bed. And so finally she had to wake up her sister, and they all ran out to the living room and slept on the floor for the next week. So
yeah, it's pretty bad.
It has something to do with my kids. You cleared it, but whoever this is or was just wanted to torment my daughters.
Yeah.
I have no idea who it was. I even went in and saged the house and everything, but I don't know. So we called you many times.
Yeah, and many times I've had interesting experiences, but I've had them outside of your family, of course, because you've steered people to me, and some people, I find on my own. Mm-hmm. And it's been very interesting. I'm amazed that I can do this. I don't understand exactly how I do it. That is to say, I know what my training is, and I know how to apply it, and it works every time. Even if there is a relapse months or years later, it's not necessarily the same thing. It's something new. And I like doing it. It's an interesting challenge. Sometimes it's a little hairy, but it's never really scary because I feel confident that I can handle anything I tackle. That may change in the future if I keep doing it. But it's a remarkable gift, even if a lot of it is the result of fairly intensive scientific and spiritual training. I mean, remote viewing and mediumship and some of the journey work I'm trained to do that I haven't talked about have enabled me to do this.
Well, I know everybody's very happy when you do this.
Yeah, you're getting the feedback directly because you're finding a lot of the clients for me One of the ones I remember that was very interesting to me is that you knew a woman in, I think it was California, who had a haunted bedroom.
Right.
And her daughter, when she lived there, was sensitive to things and said, there's a portal in this room. Things are coming from somewhere else into the portal. And I believe that was the woman who said Coke cans were flying around when nobody was throwing them.
Right.
So I worked that. And because I was told about the portal, I mentally closed the portal. And I said, this portal thing I've done before by opening them, but I've never closed one. I really want to know if that portal is closed. And the activity stopped immediately. It always seemed to do.
And has never started up again.
And it's never started up again. And that was last year I did that one. Mm-hmm. And I said, find out about the portal. And it took several months for the daughter who had lived in that bedroom, who was sensitive to, get around to visiting the house again and be asked about it. And the daughter reported, portal's gone. So I closed it. Yep. Okay. So, that tells me I can do that. I don't know what the hell a portal is exactly. I mean, how they come into existence, who opens them and whatever. Obviously, if you're going to clear a house and there's a portal problem, you got to close the portal. I learned that. I've also learned you need to clear the energy, and people have noticed the energy's changed.
Right.
I remember I worked a house in New Orleans, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, which would probably be 2 hours after I would have done the work, the woman woke up spontaneously and said, I knew you had been there and done something because the whole atmosphere of the house had changed, which I'm hearing a lot about because I've learned to clear the energy, the white light, everything. And so that not only is the entity removed, but the atmosphere that had been sort of generated by this activity had been cleared out, and the house feels safer, more normal, more clean, energetically speaking.
Well, you did a house just last month for a friend of my daughter's. And again, it was a thing of things moving, but also the bed was shaking. And he got to the point where he was afraid to even sleep in his bed any longer. But the interesting thing about it is the night that you decided to do the clearing, the bed was shaking really badly, more than ever before. And the next day, my daughter talked to me about it, and then I asked you, what time are you doing your clearing? And it was the exact same time. And from then on, it's been very calm. Nothing's happened in their house since. And it's been over a month.
And I remember thinking for a long time as I did more and more of this, at some point, inevitably, I was going to do this, and somebody would become aware that I was doing it in real time because the entity, poltergeist, ghost, would be acting up. And what was interesting about that one is there's a couple of things that was interesting about that one. But the one that goes to the bed shaking more violently than ever before, because we did compare notes, and it was the exact same time period I worked, midnight to 12:30. And since I'm in darkness and eyes closed in an altered state, I have no idea how long it takes me to do these things. It feels sometimes like 10 minutes, but sometimes it's probably 20 or 30.
Well, she said that the shaking stopped at 12:20.
Okay. That's probably more correct in terms of the time I would have cleared the place. What was interesting about that was when I came in, I encountered one, call him a ghost because I don't see them clearly. And I got him out, and I went back to do the energy clearing. And there were 3 more, and I got them out. So what I kind of figure might have happened, I don't know, is when I took the first one out, the 3 that were behind got upset and shook the bed. Now, maybe the first one shook the bed, I don't know. But, I always thought it would happen that sometime when I was doing it, whatever I was dealing with would act up and throw things around or do something crazy, and people would notice something's going on, because, they can't see him. They don't see anybody. They don't see me. I'm not there physically. I'm there spiritually. The other thing about that, because I went back the night after to clear the energy to make sure I didn't miss anybody, even though I took 4 of them out that night. The first time I went in, I found, even though I knew the problem was in the bedroom, and I'm working from a photo of the house, I don't know the layout of the house, I ended up in the attic. I said, I don't know why I'm in the attic, but I'm going to clean the energy here. When I went back to the bedroom the second night, I ended up in the attic again. I said, why do I keep landing in the attic? And, I went down to the bedroom, and there was nothing there, and I just threw some white light around and moved out. You later told me, when I told you that story, that in some way that I don't understand, the bedroom and the attic are attached or adjacent or something.
That's right. And he could understand why you would end up in the attic, because this house is from the 1880s, but it's also a museum. And so there's old stuff up in the attic from a long time ago, and could be a hangout.
Yeah. This is flashing into my mind. I mentioned that my house was haunted, the one I lived in when I was younger. And when I was cleaning out that attic for the last time, I found a bunch of old framed pictures from a family that had lived there in the 1880s. And they had pictures, they had dates on the back, and one was a picture of an infant. And it had birth and death dates. And the birth date was we think, the same year the house was built. The death date was only a few months later. So I realized a baby had been born and died in that house. And I had no idea. I'm not saying that had anything to do with what happened, because I don't know what happened in that house.
Right.
But that house was built for a family that started a family, and their baby died within a few months of being born.
Maybe their emotions carried through to the house, maybe.
Mm-hmm. You never know.
Now, let me ask you a question that maybe you can explain just a little bit. What is remote viewing, and how were you trained in that?
Remote viewing was something that was created as part of a government program for, generally espionage purposes or information gathering purposes. The Russians were fooling around with psychic work, and when the U.S. government found out, they said we need to look into that, even though we don't believe in it. And they hired some professional psychics and some scientists to get together and say, let's look at this objectively and see if there's anything here. They discovered that some people had the ability to see things distantly and, develop information that was actually verifiable. So they started refining remote viewing. Remote viewing is more or less defined as the ability to perceive persons, places, and things at great distances without regard to time, distance, or shielding. In other words, it's independent of our normal space-time reality. And they did this program for a long time, and when it was shut down and when the original remote viewers left the program, they started training civilians, and I was in one of the early groups training in it in the year 1992, the year approximately 2003, if I'm not mistaken. And I trained with a former original remote viewer, Colonel David Morehouse, who'd been he'd been attached to the Department of Defense during some of his career. And I learned to remote view. I learned two styles of remote viewing. One where you set up and you work from encrypted coordinates, so you're blind to the target. You don't know what you're supposed to be looking at. And you would write down your perceptions according to a structure they had created. The other form of remote viewing, which was called extended remote viewing, they're now calling it environmental remote viewing, which is more accurate, I think, is what I use to do this ghost work. And there you lie down and go into an altered state. You still work off coordinates. You're still not supposed to know what you're looking at. And you sort of do an auto body journey to the target area, and you just report what you see there. And sometimes people have reported a level of interaction between the environment or people in the environment as if they're being perceived, or people feel like they're being watched by the remote viewer. So when I do that, since I'm also trained as a medium, I don't interact with people. When I go into a house, I'm not aware of the people sleeping in their beds. I don't see them. Everything is shadowy and indistinct. But I do see the entities and ghosts, and I can interact with. And so I'm doing remote viewing / mediumship / soul retrieval / journey work form of remote viewing that I'm discussing, I think was adapted from, shamanic journey protocols. So I'm kind of being a shaman here when I do this. I don't have any shamanic training in the traditional sense.
Well, I know when you were going through that training, you tested it out on me. And I remember that you gave me some coordinates. You didn't tell me what the coordinates were about or anything. You just told me to follow them and see what I see. And I saw the Statue of Liberty. And that's what you said the coordinates directed me to.
Yeah.
So I've experienced it, and it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. The beauty of coordinates is you're not front-loaded and you can't. If you see anything that's accurate, it's purely psychic. Whereas if I said, I want you to remote view the Statue of Liberty and tell me what the weather is, well, that could still be very accurate. But if I tell you it's the Statue of Liberty, of course, your imagination is going to create a Statue of Liberty because you know what it is. But I give you coordinates and you're completely blind to whether the target is a thing, a person, a place, or a combination. Anything you report that's accurate, and the more accurately you report it, the more credence you can give it as valid data.
Well, I would say that we've had our share of experiences where we've probably rolled our eyes a few times going, I don't know if I believe this, and then had it proven to us, and it is the most amazing thing when these things happen.
I will remind you of the thing that happened just a few days ago. You asked me to look at a house where I wasn't told there was a ghost. I was told that successive married couples had moved into the house and the wife had started acting irrationally until there was a divorce. And I guess it was one of the previous owners, told you about the story. And I said, well, let me look and see what I could find. And I went in and everything was dark. I had to do a lot of energy clearing before I saw anything. Then I saw a woman and then another woman who's either smaller or younger or both. And I had a bad feeling about them. So I just got them out as fast as I can without asking who they were, what they were doing. And I only learned after the fact that there's a woman ghost who they call Priscilla because they think they know who she is, who's been seen by successive owners. And I wasn't told that. I was just told there was this problem with married couples and wives, deteriorating mentally or emotionally in this environment. So it was a test to see, well, is there anything there? And so that's the kind of validation you really love as a psychic. So I didn't know there was a woman. I just knew there was a problem.
I didn't either when I first told you about the house. Yeah. And then I saw the guy yesterday, and he says, yeah, the owner previous to me said, have you seen Priscilla yet? And he's going, who's Priscilla? Oh, you'll see her soon. So that was the ghost, Priscilla.
Well, she's been relocated.
Yeah, well, he's going to go find out and talk to the people there and try to get a feeling of what the environment is like and everything now. So
I would like to think I may have saved the marriage that is currently occupying that place, but I don't know.
Yeah, who needs a marriage therapist? Just have you show up and get rid of Priscilla.
I'm sure that's a fairly rare problem, but I don't know why that even happens, but there it is.
Well, I'll report back to you. Anyway, is there anything else you want to tell the listeners?
Well, one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is, I've been doing this as an experimental thing, not charging people for it, just trying to explore it to see if I could get reliable results. And, 20 plus successes is pretty amazing to me. I'm now open to doing it for the public. I don't have a fixed rate. I think what we might do is just take a donation. People pay what it's worth when they're satisfied the problem is resolved. And so I'm opening this up to the public to say, if you have a house you have good belief to be, haunted or troubled in a paranormal sense, all I need to do the work is an address, color of the house, or a picture of the house. That sometimes helps. And, where the area is. I don't really want to know what's going on. I think I can find that out for myself once I get in there. In other words, I don't want to be too front-loaded. It's like, we have a problem in this house. This is the address. this is the color of the house, and the problem seems to be in the back room or the basement or the attic. And I said, let me just get in there and see what I can do. And the beauty of the service, which I'm calling it a service, is that I don't have to come to your house. I don't have to make an appointment. There's no intrusion. You don't see me. I just, boom, pop in, do my thing, pop out. I know I make it sound ridiculously easy, but it is kind of ridiculously easy. I mean, it's like flabbergastingly easy. I probably feel better about it if I wasn't so successful. And I could say, well, usually it works, but sometimes it doesn't.
As I said before, I don't know how you do it, but you're really good at it.
20-plus successes is 20-plus successes, let's face it.
You've saved me from a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, it's very amazing. And so I'm kind of as flabbergasted as anybody else, but I also have the confidence so far that I haven't met a ghost or entity that I can't handle.
I know for a year we've been telling you, start charging for this. So a lot of people have been telling you that, so it's good that you're starting to take donations for this.
Yeah. Well, I want to be good at it so that people, get results that they can say, well, yeah, this was done. This was accomplished. And so, if you have a ghost or if someone has a ghost and they're open to this, all I need is an address, a few other pieces of information, and I will go in and I will deal with it.
So how would the listeners find you?
I guess through my email is probably the best way, and I'll give you my email address. It's Cartomancer. I'm going to spell that. CARTOMANCER @netzero.net. Netzero is spelled out as a word, .net.
I'll put a link below for it.
Yeah, that would be good. I don't want to do houses that might be haunted. I want to do houses where people know they have a problem. I'm not against doing a house that might have bad energy, that maybe there isn't a ghost or an entity, maybe the energy's bad, but that's more of a house clearing where you're just clearing out the energy. That might be worth doing once in a while. But I'm really most interested in, do you have someone there who needs to be removed? Because I think, and one of the reasons I don't charge in the beginning is that, I'm performing a service for a house owner or an occupant, but I'm also removing a ghost or a spirit that just needs to move on. And kind of like remote healing, you kind of feel odd about charging for that because you're doing something really spiritual. But, I think since people can pay what they want, I think it's appropriate to say this service is available for those, who have a need of it. Because, I've worked houses where people said, we brought in a priest and he said, yeah, there's a problem here. But he did stuff and nothing changed. So apparently I can do things that other people can't do.
I think a lot of people are going to find this very interesting and very useful. Like I said, when I buy a house, you're the first I'm going to call.
I would love to know if anybody else is doing it my way. I suspect not, but on the other hand, I can't be the only guy who does it. But remote viewing is relatively new. Mm-hmm. So who knows? All I know is I can achieve results, and I achieve them very fast and painlessly.
Well, thank you for being on the show.
It was a great experience. Thanks for having me on.
We'll talk later. Bye.
All right. Bye now.
That was my guest, Will Murray, talking about his experiences with ghost removal and energy clearing and much more. I'll leave Will's contact information below. Follow the Journey Back podcast to hear future shows. And remember that you can buy my book, Journey Back, The Amazing Memories of Individuals Through Past Life Regression, and my other books and music at Amazon or at cliffbooksmusic.com. Remember that you are now living your future past life, so make it worth looking back on. Check out my other podcast, Navigating Life with Cliff Aguirre. Also, if you're feeling anxiety and stress in your life, join me for a weekly online group of hypnosis for the calming of stress and anxiety and for the bringing of balance back into your life. I have groups for participants in the United States and also international. So it doesn't matter where you are, we all need calm, balance, and peace. For more information, go to mindbalancehypnosis.com. I'll also leave a link below. So thank you for listening.